Now, I was just recently talking to some subscribers of the channel and they were telling me how much they love when I make videos going over what a simple yet effective portfolio can look like with just a few different ETFs within it. So in this video, we're going to do exactly that once again. We're going to be going through what a perfect portfolio could look like with just 7 different ETFs that offer not only massive growth potential from day one, but also are going to pay you a boatload of cash flow too. Now, this portfolio isn't going to be perfect for the investor that only wants growth or the investor that only wants cash flow, but for the investor sort of like myself that wants their portfolio and net worth to grow over time, but also that wants to get paid a boatload of cash every single month ongoingly. So if you want to see which 7 ETFs I'm talking about when it comes to the perfect 7 ETF portfolio, if of course you're solving for massive growth and of course massive cash flow, well then make sure to stick around, drop a like down below, and let's get right into the first one. If you are a dividend investor who wants to level up your portfolio, you need to be tracking your dividend income consistently. And that's why I created the perfect dividend tracker that I've used to scale my dividend income up to all-time highs over the last year. Now, along with this dividend tracker, you're also going to receive my A to Z dividend investing ebook, which shows you how I personally started from $0 several years ago to now where I earn over $7,500 per month in dividends. So if you want this tracker and the ebook, go to the first link down below in my description and grab it today. Now, the first of 7 ETFs in this 7 ETF portfolio is going to have to be the Investco QQQ ETF, which of course offers a massive amount of growth potential. I mean, what's crazy about QQQ is that if you compare it even to the S&P 500 over this time frame, QQQ has offered 443% more return compared to the S&P. Now, during this time frame, S&P also has done amazing, but this just shows you the power of growth exposure, at least when the market plays nice. Now, for those of you guys that don't know, this ETF tracks the NASDAQ 100 index, giving you access to the performance of the 100 largest non-financial companies listed on the NASDAQ. The fund and index are rebalanced quarterly and reconstituted annually also. So in this ETF, you're getting exposure to 100 more or less of some of the fastest growing non-financial companies. And again, when the market plays nice and we are in a bull market, you're normally going to see ETFs like this one absolutely skyrocket. Now, remember, this ETF is going to be higher beta and it's going to be very growth focused. So again, if you're looking for growth exposure, there's probably not a better way to get it than this one. But speaking of growth exposure, the number 2 ETF in this 7 ETF portfolio that offers massive growth and income from day one would have to be one of my personal favorite growth ETFs across the entire market. And I'm talking about the Schwab US Large Cap Growth ETF. Now, this is ticker symbol SCHG, which is very cheap to own at just a 0.04% expense ratio. Now, this fund's goal is to track as closely as possible before fees and expenses the total return of the Dow Jones US Large Cap Growth Total Stock Market Index. Now, this ETF has done amazing over the past several years and has outperformed a lot of its peers because of the names, of course, that make up the ETF. Names like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, names like Amazon, Meta. Lots of these technology companies that at least over multiple different time frames have done amazing. Now, once again, just like the last ETF, this ETF is going to be more growth focused. So again, if you're not necessarily looking for that type of thing, or if you are, SCHG is definitely a great ETF to look into. Now, number 3 out of 7 in this 7 ETF portfolio. Now we're going to get into more of the income/growth space or dividend growth. Now we're talking about SCHD now, the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, which is my personal favorite ETF across the market. And this is because SCHD offers growth potential, income from day one, and massive dividend growth also. Now this means that this ETF might not grow the fastest or pay the most amount of income, but over time, at least historically, this ETF has paid investors more and more in dividend income over the years. Now this ETF's objective is to track as closely as possible before fees and expenses the total return of the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index. This ETF is also super cheap to hold on to with an expense ratio of 0.06%. It's pretty tax efficient, and like I said, you're getting exposure to around 100 different companies that all for the most part have done pretty well and paid dividends and more in dividends over the years. Now again, my favorite part about this ETF is that it's sort of a hybrid of a growth ETF and an income-oriented ETF and sort of offers a nice mix of both from day one. But speaking of income, now we're getting into the higher income side of the portfolio because like I said, at least for this video's example, this is a perfect 7 ETF portfolio, which is going to offer massive exposure to growth, which could potentially grow your net worth and your portfolio, but also you're going to get paid a boatload of income from day one. Which brings me into our next name, QQQI, the NEOS NASDAQ 100 High Income ETF. This is one of my favorite ETFs that offers an option strategy, which generates a ton of income, and this is all while utilizing the NASDAQ 100, which I also am a huge fan of. Now, the objective for this one, it says the NEOS NASDAQ 100 High Income ETF, the fund, seeks to generate high monthly income in a tax-efficient manner with the potential for equity appreciation. Now, honestly, in my opinion, it doesn't get much better than that. High monthly income, tax-efficient is also a bonus, but also the potential for equity appreciation all on top of that. Now again, if you're not necessarily super focused on high income, let's say you want more growth exposure, then maybe names like this one might not be perfect for your portfolio. But if you are one of those investors like myself that do want income exposure, and that's even if you're a little bit younger, the NEO's NASDAQ 100 high income ETF is one of my favorites to do it, especially in the context of having exposure to the NASDAQ 100. Now on the other side of things, I also would add an SPYI, the NEO's S&P 500 high income ETF, which does the same thing as the last one more or less. The only difference is this one invests in the constituents of the S&P 500. Now say what you want, but it's really hard to outperform either the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ 100. And in my opinion, those are two areas I really can't get enough exposure to in my portfolio personally. So that's why I'm a huge fan of this ETF also. It offers a 12% yield. The last one offers almost a 14% yield. We're talking massive amounts of income generation with a little bit of money spent, and all through a pretty tax efficient manner. Now, the last two ETFs that I would include in this 7 ETF portfolio that again is going to offer growth and income is going to be, of course, one of my other favorites, JEPQ, an ETF that has grown over time at least a little bit over the years, but also has offered almost a 10% yield over multiple different timeframes. Now, the JP Morgan NASDAQ Equity Premium Income ETF seeks to deliver monthly distributable income and NASDAQ 100 exposure, but with less volatility. So more NASDAQ 100 exposure with JEPQ, but also with that premium income option overlay. This ETF, once again, has the potential to generate a massive amount of income from day one. Now, last but not least, of course, there's so many cool, awesome ETFs to go through, and we can make 100 of these videos basically mixing them all together. But the final ETF for this video's example is going to be one of my personal favorites, an ETF that I've been buying like crazy so far in 2025. We're talking about Devo, or the Amplify CWP Enhanced Dividend Income ETF, which basically invests in a small amount of holdings as of right now, around 32 of them, and then dynamically writes calls on individual stocks in order to generate a lot more yield than you'd be able to otherwise. Now, the reason I think Devo is a perfect position for this portfolio's example and for my personal portfolio in real life is because Devo does sort of what SHD offers. It offers the potential for growth exposure, but also pays a lot of yield, around 5% more or less starting. Now, again, for me as an investor, I don't necessarily want to have the fastest growing portfolio or the highest yielding portfolio. I truly want a nice hybrid. I want my portfolio net worth to grow over time, but I also want to earn a lot of income ASAP. So that's why it feels like ETFs like this one, Devo, are almost built perfectly for me. And that's because, again, you're getting exposure to different names that have the potential to grow, but with the cover call overlay, you're generating a lot more income from day one, all while doing so in a low beta fashion and generally pretty tax efficient. Now, with all that being said, Devo would have to be the final 7th ETF in the 7 ETF portfolio, which would offer a massive amount of growth and income. So there we have it, guys. There is the perfect 7 ETF portfolio. Like I said, right here on X at Devoted Dividend. If you guys want to follow me, I'll follow you back. Just message me and tell me you came from YouTube. But again, this is a perfect 7 ETF portfolio that solves for a massive amount of growth potential and income potential also. Now, especially if you're a newer investor, take some time, do some research. There's so many different ETFs out there these days that offer exactly more or less what you're looking for. I guarantee it. Now, I'm not saying that these ETFs necessarily offer what you're looking for specifically, but the cool thing is that these days in the market, it really does feel like there's a product that's almost built perfectly for all of us. So now that we went through the perfect 7 ETF portfolio in my humble opinion, I most importantly want to hear from you guys down below. If I were to ask you to build out your dream 7 ETF portfolio, and it could be more of a growth portfolio or of course an income-based portfolio, comment down below what your perfect 7 ETF portfolio would look like. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like on it and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.